I am your host, Nicole Will, and we're so happy you're here as we navigate the world with your aging loved one. We are here to come alongside older adults, family members, and the senior living community as we explore the world of aging and elder care with helpful resources, informative interviews, and approachable conversation. We get to do this together, so join us on our journey, and this is the willGather podcast. Today, we not only have one, but two incredible guests, Dr. David Bernstein and his wife, Melissa Bernstein. Dr. David Bernstein is a highly respected physician who is board certified in both internal medicine and geriatrics. Practicing in Florida, he has 40 years of experience, providing him with many opportunities to observe and empathize with thousands of adults as they age. And throughout this time in his career, he has learned and walked through so many life journeys with people that led him to publish some books which can be so helpful for all of us. Today we are talking about what is a geriatrician, all of the different lessons that he has learned in working with many older adults. Specifically, we will be discussing the books that he has written, The Power of Five. Continue to listen to our conversation so you can see what that is. And we will also be extending this episode into two parts so we can hear from his wife, Melissa Bernstein, who has written the book, The Power of Five Test Kitchen, which incorporates Dr. Bernstein's Power of Five book. This is a really dynamic conversation as we look at longevity, things that we can do, actionable steps, and how to live a full, and as Dr. Bernstein would say, really great health span. Hi, Dr. Bernstein and Melissa. Thank you for joining me today. I am really excited to have this conversation. You've done some really great work, and a lot has brought you to the point where you're at today. So I would love for you to tell us about that and fill us in. What is a geriatrician?
Well, I'd love to tell you a little bit about myself. As I was growing up, I was influenced by my parents to consider a profession like being a doctor. That's what helped in my family. When I was 17, I read an article in the National Geographic magazine that really influenced me a lot. It was about centenarians, people who lived to be 100. So I thought that was really pretty fascinating. And my grandparents were getting on in their years, and I listened to my mother lament about how the physicians taking care of our parents, my grandparents, were lacked empathy and didn't particularly care to do their job. And as I progressed through my college years, I decided taking care of an underserved community or population like elderly adults would be a really good thing. I have to admit it would probably be less competitive. So, but those things influenced me a great deal. And as I proceeded in my career, I did enjoy taking care of older adults. I found them fascinating, full of stories. Balancing or juggling multiple chronic diseases at one time was something that was appealing to me. And I became a geriatrician. A geriatrician is a physician who specializes in internal medicine and goes on to have a subspecialty in taking care of older adults. And older adults are people who have chronic medical conditions, and among them are cardiovascular diseases and neuromuscular disease and neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and dementia. So a lot of experience in taking care of those populations.
So varied. And when I was reading your book, one thing that stood out to me was how lucky that your patients were to have you as a doctor. Really, the personal care and attention and understanding their lived lives up until the point until they met you. So I appreciate that, because you're right, I think, and I'm generalizing, but it's so important when you find that relationship with your physician that can be a personal one, because we're dealing with a lot of personal things as we are going through life and aging. So it seems like a wonderful practice that you had.
Well, thanks.
One of the things that I was so impressed with is that Dr. Bernstein has seen generations of families, which I think is really special for someone, a geriatrician, who can see the kinds of growth in a family, the issues in a family, then he sees their children, then he sees their grandchildren. So he gets to see the whole lifespan of a complete family, which is, just amazing information when you're diagnosing and treating and helping people to live longer.
To see the whole picture. What is it about your position as a geriatrician that makes you an expert in longevity and remaining youthful?
Well, it's an interesting question because patients would come in to see me when they were 62, and they say, I never knew what time or what age you go to see a geriatrician. And I said, the earlier the better, because I know what happens at the end of life, and I've learned the things that you can do so that you land in the best possible place. And people talk about lifespan or life expectancy, but those of us in this field talk about a health span. I want people to have the best possible health up until the time that they die. And there's nothing, there's always an understanding about the only two things in life are death and taxes. So since I know people are going to pay their taxes and they're also going to die, I want to extend that time, make that life expectancy, that lifespan, that health span as good as it possibly can be. And the earlier I start with my patients, or the earlier the patients start, I'm working on that, the better. You know, when people talk about lifespan, you could live to be 90. But if you become disabled when you're 65 and live to 85, you've had 20 years of living with a disability. It's better to have a health span and span that out to 85 and die when you're 85 and have those 20 years of good, healthy living.
You really interject those personal stories when you're talking about the different factors in your book. What have you learned from taking care of all of those different people as they age?
Well, it's a two-way street. After a period of time, I became really good at what I did. So taking care of the health problems was relatively straightforward. So I would extract these stories from my patients. And it was like for 25 years, I stored them up until I wrote my first book. And then I sat down and I kind of like threw the pieces of a puzzle to get out. And I extracted the fact that there are 5 things that people did that led to a happy, long, healthy life. And the other thing that occurred to me as I was doing that is I needed to make it simple. I wanted people to remember those things. And I believe people can remember only 5 things at a time. So I've limited any recommendations I make to just 5. So what were the 5 things that I saw consistently in those people who aged well? And one was they all had a goal or a purpose in their lives. They had jobs, they owned real estate, they did various things that kept them connected to other people and gave them a purpose. Those people had roots, and roots can be defined in different ways. I'd like to start by talking about DNA. If you know your DNA and it's good, well, take good care of it. If you know your DNA and it's bad, do a whole bunch of things to overcome what bad genes you have. And the other way of looking at roots is your family roots and how deep your roots go within your family, your community, and what is holding you together. So that's goals and roots. And then the third one was attitude. These people had positive attitudes. And what was most intriguing about it, or thing that I kind of didn't expect as much, was they all expressed gratitude. Those patients who expressed gratitude to me when they came to the office were the ones who had the happiest and they were the healthiest. And it was really quite amazing. And I digress for a little bit, but I wrote one of the chapters, and the chapter in the book was going to be all about me, because as my wife would tell you, everything revolves around me. Self-deprecating humor.
Mm-hmm.
So it was about how I hit home runs with patients and saved their lives. And truth is, as an internist and geriatrician, you don't do that very much. But what I found was, after putting those stories together, what mattered most was giving people an opportunity to express their gratitude to me. And they appreciated, and they got so much more out of expressing that gratitude than I actually got hearing it. And it was like therapeutic for them. One particular guy named Jack thanked me every time he came in the office for finding his prostate cancer. And he loved to do it. He got so much out of it. So it was really pretty amazing and awe-inspiring and eye-opening, really. The fourth one is C for companionship. And companionship is incredibly important. It's about our connections in the world. It's about having that one person in your life you're really connected with and you can share a life with. And those people that aged so well had done that. It was such an important factor that I actually included it in my second big book. But to dwell on it just for another little bit, that companionship, the opposite of that is loneliness. And you and I, and the three of us, know how important companionship is because loneliness is a health hazard. It's the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And so those people who had that companionship had better lives, even if it was, a nagging wife who said, go to the doctor for that cough. Or if you don't have a wife and you have a friend and some companion that sends you to the doctor, but it goes beyond that. And I used the letter E in GRACE to mean environment. So environment is everything around us. And it was very broad, but I needed a letter to make the word GRACE. So E and environment is what you eat, how you exercise, how you sleep, how you meditate and relax. Those are the 5 things that those people who live those long, healthy lives, that health span, those people did the best. And that was observation. And it was profound. And it was people showing me that that's what worked.
And you use that acronym GRACE to come up with all of those different pointers. And it's easy to remember when we look at it like that. Tell us about that age gracefully. What does that mean to you?
There are 2 ways about looking at what I've written about.
Mm-hmm.
So when I wrote my first book, that was sort of a retrospective look in terms of what these people did that made them survive so well. So I would encourage people to look at their lives and say, how can I make it more graceful? How could I get to that end, that great health span? What am I doing in terms of having a goal or a purpose? For me personally, I'm working with my best buddy over here, my wife, and we have a goal and purpose in our lives. I've recently retired, but this is something I've always wanted to do. So having a goal and purpose is a great thing in life. And knowing what my genes are, there was cardiovascular disease in my family. I try and do all the things that would avoid those risks or reduce those risks. If I didn't learn to have gratitude and a positive attitude, I really encourage myself to do it more and more. And having a little bit more time on my hands, I go out of my way to really do it, incorporate it in my life. Companionship. I work on my companionship here and with others in the community. And I work a lot in my own personal environment. We'll talk about that maybe.
Yes, we will. Our audience really focuses on those family caregivers, right? Our baby boomers. Why should we pay attention to what you are sharing with us today? Why is that important?
The grace part and the 5 S's, part of the power of 5, are things that are incredibly important to remain healthy. And we're talking about caregivers, and you can divide caregivers into 2 groups, really, I think. One is the caregiver who's living with a family member who's living with the person who requires care, or someone who's a paid caregiver coming into someone's home to do the work. In either case, maintaining good health, physical and mental, is incredibly important. And if you don't take care of yourself, then you're going to fail when you need to take care of the person who needs care. And that person who needs care may need 8 hours or 24 hours, or as the book says, 36 hours in a day of care. So maintaining your fitness is incredibly important. And, I took it upon myself that it was incredibly important to me as a physician to take care of myself, because if I didn't show up to work because I was ill or wasn't fit enough to get out of a chair or get out of my car, then I wasn't any good to my patients or my family for that matter. So it's incredibly important to recognize that piece of this. And in terms of the work that you do, working with caregivers, it's incredibly important to stress that. because a table of cards falls down if you're part of that structure. You also mentioned baby boomers. When I would sit down to write anything, I would sit down and think, I'm writing this book for baby boomers. I'm writing this book for my high school classmates. At my age, I'm right in the middle of baby boomers. So what would be those subjects that baby boomers wanted to know about? And I believe they wanted to know about how they can take care of their house, how they can get started if they can up until a given point, and how they were going to deal with their aging parent, particularly the question about driving. So I wrote a little book about that. But everything is devoted to how you can make your health as good as possible and how you can make it, we'll say, easier for the geriatrician at the end of the line to put those little pieces back together.
What is the power of 5? And we will talk more about that as we go on. But if we can just set the stage for people listening.
I wrote my book, Grace. There were 5 letters in it. And I wanted to come up with 5 things looking into research about what were the things that people could do intentionally to make their health better. Because Grace was about the things that people did. So what could people do? So I stuck with my theme of 5 and came up with 5 things. And then I realized they could all begin with the letter S. So I picked those 5 things and talked about it's important to get more sleep in life. And you probably can't go through a day without seeing some article about the importance of sleep. I talked about the importance of stress reduction and eliminating stress from your life. I talked about eliminating sugar, and how bad sugar is for ourselves. I talked about sweat, because that's exercise, and how important exercise is. So none of these things, and I got one more, but none of these things are earth-shattering that people haven't talked about. I just put 5 S's together so people would remember them. And the 5th S that I've used is sex. But sex is really about companionship, socialization, and intimacy. And it's that intimacy, again, the opposite of loneliness, that's just so important. And those 5 things, as I said, all require intention. That you set up a chart every day, or Melissa and I wrote a journal to track things every day so that you know what you're eating, diet, sweets. You know what your exercise is, you know what your sleep is, you know what you're doing in terms of meditation, and that you have a plan for integrating yourself either with your loved one or in your community or with other people, so that you have the interaction that's been shown to have a favorable impact on your health.
When you talk about all of these different factors, a lot that leads to that, right, is illness and disability. You've observed many things out in your career. What do they all have in common?
The thing that I observed were the things I saw most frequently in my practice, and those were cardiovascular disease, cancer, and neurodegenerative disease. And as I analyzed those things, I thought, what is a unifying factor? What one thing do they have in common? And what they had in common was this idea of chronic inflammation, that Americans, or at least those that I treated, have diseases that causes inflammatory reaction in their body. It contributes in a major way to cardiovascular disease. And we know that those things also create neurodegenerative diseases and frailty. And so any of the things that we can do to address inflammation would be important characteristics and factors that would have a favorable impact on our health.
And what leads to inflammation in our body? I think, we kind of think of some of the maybe big ones, right? Like diet and certain things that we eat, or sugar. But what are some of those other things that cause that?
You look at inflammation, and acute inflammation is like an illness like pneumonia, and people get over pneumonia. That's an acute illness. But a splinter in your finger also causes inflammation. And if you don't take the splinter out, it will fester. And it will become a chronic illness or chronic infection in the finger. Well, those people who don't follow good, healthy lifestyle will have an undercurrent in their body. They can't feel it necessarily, of chronic inflammation. And that chronic inflammation will lead to vascular clogging, vascular neurodegenerative disease. And some of the things that are created in there, for example, stress increases cortisol levels. And cortisol levels are hazardous to our body. They come from the adrenal gland. Or when we have sleep disorders and don't get enough sleep, or even sleep apnea, which is really quite common, when you have sleep apnea and you abruptly become deprived of oxygen in the middle of the night, your brain says, something's going on here, kindly wake up, and then start screaming at you to wake up. You have a fight or flight reaction with adrenaline, and you have this adrenaline surge, which raises blood pressure, heart rate, and it's another factor that contributes to this process. The chronic stress that people are under contributes to that. And even not only sugar, but some of the other things that people incorporate in their diet will cause changes in our gastrointestinal tract, which in turn will lead to this inflammatory state.
You also talk about the expensive healthcare system we have and how that can be really challenging for people right then to seek the care that they might need, and what you've noticed in your years of practice.
Healthcare is incredibly expensive and very complex issue because we don't tie the expense of health to people's budgets. And so there are people who just don't get medical care. You hear about that a lot. But also there's not a strong enough motivation from my perspective for people to be healthy. They have this insurance, they go and it's covered, and Dr. Bernstein will say, make a dietary change, you go out and exercise. Here's some instructions. Right? Here's the diet to use. Here's the exercise to do. I wrote a book, go buy my book. Nothing happens. There's not enough motivation in our healthcare system to do that. Even the things that are preventive medicine, we have to work really hard to get people to do preventive things. And there's some things in the news currently about that as well. So it's a real challenge, and people then end up in the hospital. Some of my patients would rather have a heart stent put in their blood vessel in their heart than make the dietary changes to lower their cholesterol, their blood pressure, etc. So it's a real frustration within healthcare professionals.
And most of us, well, not most of us, I shouldn't generalize like that. Some people wait till crisis, not always acting on that preventative, and then we're in crisis, and then it's really expensive when we're in crisis because we are either in the emergency room or needing a surgery we possibly could have prevented. And so it's complex, all of it.
It is. And my job was crisis management every day. There wasn't as much thinking cerebral type things that I got to do. I will tell you that having the wonderful patients that I had and having developed some skills over the course of time, that once I got those things tucked away, I was able to interact with my patients for a few extra minutes, and they derive so much pleasure and gain from that we both benefit.
And for some older adults, I noticed when I was in a care community that sometimes that interaction with the person that's providing care is sometimes that one maybe personal connection during the day. And so there is a lot of joy when you're able to have that.
True. And I know for many patients that I took care of, I was pretty much their only personal connection.
Yeah.
I was kind of like their family. And I had to take that responsibility. I took it seriously, but I didn't bring it home with me, and I wasn't attached to them in that way. Mm-hmm. But I knew that was their dose for the day or the week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Then some. I remember one particular gentleman as he was approaching 100, and he lived alone. I would have him come in every week or so, just because he needed me and I needed him a little bit to know that he was going to be okay.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. Showing up in the world and caring for people. That's meaningful work.
Thank you.
You're right. The 5 attributes with sleep, sweat, sweets, stress, and sex were very easy to remember. Now I will honestly probably walk around and be like, am I doing the 5 things? Because it is. I guess I never distilled it down into those different categories before. But I really like that you included sex, because that's a topic people are not as open to talking about all the time, but I think we should. And so why did you include this, and what about your list makes it so unique?
I decided that when I wrote a book, I was going to include sex in there somewhere, because I heard back in my earlier days that sex sells. So I wanted sex on the cover, and truly it's an important part of life. It's about intimacy. And when I was starting out in practice, to ask a person about their sex life was very awkward. And it would be like I had to pull these words up from my guts to say, well, are you sexually satisfied? Are you sexually active? And I was hard. But after asking it 3 or 4 or 5 times, I became more and more comfortable with it. And patients wanted to talk to me about it. They would tell me, you're the only doctor in all my years who asked that. And I said, is that good or bad? But they appreciated that I was going to ask about their intimacy and how their relationship was going. And I got more and more comfortable asking about it, so that it fit in with my questions after I would ask about how their eyes were working, their heart was working, and the circulation. And I'd say, how's your sex life? Or are you sexually active? And the things, is your performance okay? Because, there shouldn't be a big question about it, because it ties in with heart disease and blood vessel disease. And it also tells me a little bit about their companionship with the person they live with, or how things are really going, or they really are happy about it. So it opens up a whole bunch of things that people can talk about. And my patients did blush at first, but they were very happy that I would ask and talk about it, because there was one more area I could help them.
I love that you asked the question, because I think it's unfair for us to assume that that's not a part of our lives as we get older. And it's one of those things too, that there's so many benefits mentally, emotionally, physically. It's kind of like that term, use it or lose it, right? There's so many things that are positive about that.
Certainly. And even after I wrote my first book, I've got some good news and some bad news. I did 5 videos and I put them on YouTube. And I won't describe 4 of the 5, but the 5th one was sex after 80. I got 20 or 30 times more views on that video than any of the others. And it was sex after 80. And people want to know about it. And people want to establish what I'm able to do in later life that enables me to be intimate with my partner.
To stay in a place where we're still able to engage in that. I also think, would you say that by assuming or by not talking about it, we're almost kind of feeding into the ageism of the idea that as we get older, we can't participate in certain things or be a part of certain things. And so I think it's really dispelling some of those myths as well that are important.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no doubt about it. And I never consider myself in that to be treated with ageism, but I can't remember at this moment exactly what it was, but I was treated as an ageism in a store not too long ago. I'd ask them, it was a techie kind of question. Oh, it was somewhere where someone just blew me off because I asked a tech kind of question. It was like, wait a minute, that's not right.
Right.
That didn't feel good.
No.
Like, my kids might do that, but, like not in a store. Yeah. I think it was, now I'm remembering it where it was. It was in a big box store that sells office supplies. And I asked a question and he just blew me off, and I'm not even close.
Oh, I know
In
those
your own
assumptions are
mind.
so
In my own
In your own
mind.
mind.
Yeah. Yes, yes. We know that there are a lot of challenges that we face as we've got our aging parents, and as every day, right, we're aging. The gift of turning another year older is that we're here, but we are aging. What are some of those major challenges facing those aging parents and care recipients, and what can be done to avoid those?
Very broad question, and I have several different answers for you.
Yeah.
One is some things that Melissa and I have done in our home because we're aging and we have kids. So that we fit into that category. Melissa will say we have a 10-year plan. We update our 10-year plan every 3 or 4 months, but we have a 10-year plan. And our 10-year plan is what can we do in our home to make it safe and so that we can remain here. What we have in our backyard is ultimate privacy. We live on the top of the bay. Our neighbors can't see us. We can't see them. We have total privacy in this house. We love it here. It's in Florida. We're in the hurricane zone, so we need to be careful. But we've updated our kitchen. We've updated our bathrooms. We probably need, if we stay in this house another 10 or 15 years, we need to update some things more. But it's very livable for us, and that I don't always see seniors doing that. And if you want to stay in your home, you need, what I would say to my patients, if you want to stay where you are, fine. I think there are better solutions for you, but here's some things to do. That takes us into the other part of your question, is this idea of denial, that I've taken care of enough people who retired to Florida so that their kids can't see what's going on in their lives, and that they live down here isolated from family. They develop friends, and they have their own little lives, and they become more frail. Frailty is related to inflammation, and they get this inflammation, they get frail, they're in a sense of denial, they don't tell their family doesn't check on them, and things crumble. And that's where the crisis comes.
You just reminded me of an interaction I had with some of my residents where the denial piece, I was looking for a gal we were going to have an event together, and I was bringing people, and I was reminding her that the time that things are going to be happening. And she had said, well, I'm fine. You really got to worry about so-and-so over there. And I just had to laugh to myself because her memory was not okay, but just the idea of I'm good. And part of me, I loved just the positiveness of it, but also we're the first ones. It's harder to see kind of what we're going through ourselves first before looking to others and what the issues are.
As I was going through my Rolodex in my mind of patients, there was this one particular individual, and I took care of her and her husband and some of her friends, and her husband died, and she was alone, and her daughters were in town, and they would look after her and kind of call me or come to a visit with her, and I'd say, okay, now you live over there and you're not doing as well. Think about a retirement community. Oh, no, I don't need that yet. And ultimately she said, I'm going to move there when I'm ready, but I'm not ready yet. And I'm not ready yet became the crisis, and she skipped over the ability to go to that independent living facility, and ultimately ended up in a nursing home, and skipped the entire chance to live a healthier life that was free of having to go grocery shopping and get the garden done and all those other things that she refused to give up in her sense of denial.
Yeah, and the sense of community that can happen in those environments also is so great for people to feel really encouraged. What can people do right now to turn things around? As you know, I think sometimes we feel like, oh my gosh, I'm too late. Are they too late? And what can be done? And we will also be hearing from your lovely wife, because a lot of what she's going to share with us is also going to set people up for success.
You and I have talked and used a lot of expressions. And one is, it's never too late. I think it's better to start early and have a plan, but it's never too late. And research has shown that. So starting today is the way to go. And starting low and progressing. I've recently read some habits about, some books about habits. And one of the things about starting a new habit is doing that thing just once. Even if it's a push-up, do one push-up. Because by the time you get down on the floor and do one push-up, you go, I'm going to do 2 or 3 or 4. And by the time the next day comes around, you say, I can do 10 or I can do 15. And so that's how habits begin. And a habit gets situated or you get it so that it stays in place if you do it for somewhere between 30 and 90 days. So when Melissa and I wrote our journal, we wrote a journal for people to use for 90 days so that they can get those habits, those newer habits, incorporated into their whole body and their routine. So starting a routine, and so it may be exercise, and then, I'll be vegetarian 1 day a week, meatless Monday. And before you know it, there's 3 days a week where you're really making some major changes in your diet. Oh, I don't know how to meditate. I'll meditate for 1 minute. I could probably meditate for 1 minute every day. I can take 5 deep breaths on the couch before my day starts. So any one of those things, I'm going to set myself a goal to sleep 6 hours a day. And in my life, that's been really difficult, but I push myself to make sure I stay in bed and get that extra sleep. And all of it has to be done with intention. Intention's a big word here. And it's the same with companionship. People don't knock on my door and say they want to be my friend. You need a spouse like mine to make some calls and get us together when we can get with other people or be sociable and go out and do things. But it takes an intention, and you need to set a reminder to do that. That's and it does make a difference. People who change their diet and exercise really do make a difference in their body. Do they always feel better? No, maybe not, but I know they're doing something favorable. Research in medicine has shown that.
I've noticed I feel so much better when I honor the promises I make to myself. Making those promises, setting those intentions, and when I'm accomplishing that, then I'm like, okay, pat myself on the back. I did that, and okay, let's take on the next day. Dr. Bernstein, thank you so much for all of your thoughts and wisdom and insight today. And I would have to say, really, people need to read your books because there's so much information that it's hard for us to cover in an hour, but really great stuff that they can incorporate into their life.
And my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening today. If you enjoyed our episode, please subscribe and give us 5 stars. In all honesty, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for listening to our episode.